Hello again. Now we're into the second half of going through an ACT test. If you haven't watched the first two videos, hopefully you can go back and see those, but we're going to try and prepare you for the math section of the ACT. So our first question in this part is number 31. To make a 750-piece jigsaw puzzle more challenging, a puzzle company includes 5 extra pieces in the box along with the 750 pieces. And those 5 extra pieces do not fit anywhere in the puzzle. If you buy such a puzzle and break the seal on the box and immediately select one piece at random, what is the probability that it will be one of the extra pieces? And our choices are 1/5, 1/755, 1/750th, 5 750ths, and 5 750ths. The key on this one is don't overthink the question. There's 755 total pieces. 5 of them are the extras that don't fit. So what we want out of how many total? 5 out of 755. Question number 32. What fraction lies exactly halfway between 2/3 and 3/4? And it might be 3/5, 5/6, 7/12, 9/16, or 17/24. So here they're essentially asking us to find the median. We have to add up the two fractions and then divide by 2. So a couple of things I'll point out with this. On the top screen of the calculator, I did 2/3 plus 3/4 divided by 2. And all I did to do that is I put the fractions in parentheses and I entered the fractions with divided by. So 2 divided by 3 plus 3 divided by 4. Then I divided everything by 2. Now, of course, the calculator gives you a decimal answer. Something you may or may not know is that on a graphing calculator, you can change a decimal back to a fraction really easily. All you have to do is hit second and the math key. The very first choice says arrow frac, which means change this to a fraction. And so I just have the answer, change it to a fraction. It tells me it's 17/24, and that's the overall answer. So next we have a whole section of questions that go together. We have a situation that we use for questions 33 through 35. And on this one it says Gianna is converting a 12-foot by 15-foot room in her house to be a craft room. Gianna will install tile herself, but she'll have CC Installations build and install the cabinets. The scale drawing below displays the location of the cabinets in the craft room, and it tells us that 0.25 inch represents 2 feet. So the first question that goes with this, number 33, says a 15-foot wall is how long in the scale drawing? And all the numbers that are here would be inches, even though they're not labeled, but we have 1.5, 1.875, 3, 3.375, and 3.75. So there was a question very similar to this earlier in the sample test. The key part of this is that 0.25 inches represents 2 feet. And I just did this with cross multiplying. 0.25 over 2 equals x over 15. If you cross multiply, you end up with 1.875, so the answer's got to be B. So number 34 also goes with the picture and introduction we had earlier. It says Gianna will install tile on the portion of the floor that will not be covered by cabinets. What is the area in square feet of the portion of the floor that will not be covered by cabinets? And it might be 72, 90, 140, 156, or 164 square feet. And so to do this, I just found the area of the whole room, and then I got rid of the part that's covered by cabinets. So in this, you'll notice what I did is take 13 times 12 minus 4 times 4. The 13 is just, we had a 15-foot wall and 2 feet of it. It told us that the cabinets were 2 feet deep. That is going to be cabinets. 15 minus 2 is 13. So 13 times 12 minus the 4 times 4 is those cabinets that are in the middle. Each cabinet is 2 wide, so 2 of them are going to be 4. I subtracted those, I got 140 square feet. In number 35, it says CC Installations estimate consists of a $650 charge for labor plus a fixed charge per cabinet. The labor charge and the charge per cabinet remain the same for any number of cabinets built and installed. CC Installations would give Gina what estimate if the craft room were to have twice as many cabinets as Gina is planning to have? And we have $2,800, $3,000, $3,450, $3,650, or $4,300 as the possible choices. So I used the information in this problem to write a little equation. It says we have to pay $650 no matter what, and we pay $10 for each cabinet. Now, back in the original problem, it told us she had to pay $2,150. So I put 650 plus 10x equals 2,150. I solved that and figured out that what they must be charging is $150 per cabinet. When I went through this problem in my classes, I had some people that were confused and wondered, where did I get the 10x? How did I know that there were 10 cabinets that she was installing? And if you look at the picture and you realize that the cabinets are 2 by 2, we have a 12-foot wall, and if each cabinet is 2 feet, that means there's going to be 6 cabinets along the wall. There's also 4 more that are in the island in the middle of the room, so that does make a total of 10 cabinets, and that's why it's 10x. Since she wants to install twice as many cabinets, that means she's going to install 20. So I did the $650 and pay automatically plus 20 times 150, and what they're going to charge her is $3,650, which is choice D. Next question, number 36. It says, which of the following is the graph of the region 1 is less than x plus y, which is less than 2, in the standard xy coordinate plane? And you can see that we have 5 different choices, all of which are some dotted lines with an area in the middle that's shaded. So since I know that we're looking at lines, what I tried to do was rewrite this expression so that I could see what those lines were. Basically, I got y in the middle, and I did that by subtracting x everywhere in this expression. I get negative x plus 1 is less than y, which is less than negative x plus 2. Now, if you think back to y equals mx plus b, the slope is always the numbers that are by x. And here, since they both say negative x, that would be negative 1. The y-intercept is the number by itself, which for the first line is going to be 1, and for the second line is going to be 2. So now I have to use my common sense about slope and y-intercept and see which of these graphs involves what I know. I know that the slope of both lines has to be negative. That means they've got to be going down as I go from left to right, and that limits the possibilities to j and k. It can't be anything on the left. The other thing I know is that one of them has a y-intercept of 1, one of them has a y-intercept of 2. Y-intercept means where does it cut through the y-axis in the middle? And it turns out that on j, you have a y-intercept of 1 at the bottom, a y-intercept of 2 at the top, and so that's why j is the answer. If I were to look at k, the y-intercept of the bottom line would be -1 rather than +1, and that is why it's j rather than k. Now we have what's the difference between the mean and the median of the set 3, 8, 10, 15. And it might be 0, 1, 4, 9, or 12. Key thing is what's the difference between the mean and the median. Now there were problems earlier that asked about each of these two things. Mean is where you add up the numbers and divide by how many there are. I did that on the calculator and found out that the mean is 9. Median means the exact center. Here it would be what's halfway between 8 and 10, and halfway between 8 and 10 is also 9. Since both the mean and the median are 9, the difference between them is going to be 0, and it ends up being A. 38. Which of the following describes a true relationship between the functions f of x equals x minus 3 squared plus 2 and g of x equals 1/2 x plus 1, graph below in the standard xy coordinate plane? So the choices they're telling us are f equals g for 2 values, f equals g for 1 value, f is less than g for everything, f is greater than g for everything, or f is the inverse of g of x. So the equations and the theory behind this is something that I would teach in math analysis, and a lot of people taking the ACT have never had that class. However, you really don't have to have that class to understand what's going on with this problem, because all it means for functions to be equal is that they intersect. That means the graphs are going to touch. In this problem, the graphs touch in 2 places, and we'll find in a second that's why the answer's F. If they intersected at one place, then the parabola would just like touch the line and bounce back off of it without cutting through. Greater than and less than would mean one graph would be entirely above or below the other for the entire distance, which would mean they don't intersect at all. And that's why it's not H and J. Inverse is not this problem. What you would have is things that are like turned 90 degrees if you did that, and that's not what's going on here. So in this problem, the 2 graphs touch twice. That's why they're equal for exactly 2 values. And then we have another situation where we use the same introduction for multiple problems. Here it says trapezoid ABCD is graphed in the standard XY coordinate plane below, and you can see a trapezoid there, and they're going to ask us 3 different questions about it. First question is, what's the slope of CD? The choices they give us are -3, -1, 1, 5/21, and 3/2. So this really goes all the way back to Algebra 1. It's just subtract the y's, subtract the x's, and make a fraction out of that, rise over run. Nobody really cares that it's a trapezoid. What I care about is what are the numbers for C and D. I subtract the y's, 4 minus 1. I subtract the x's, 9 minus 12. Make the fraction. It turns out to be 3 over -3, which is -1, and that is choice B. So the second question, when ABCD is reflected over the y-axis to A prime, B prime, C prime, D prime, what are the coordinates of D prime? And the possibilities are it could be -12, 1, -12, -1, 12, -1, 1, 12, or 1, -12. So a lot of schools cover this in geometry, but it's not something I generally teach myself in my classes. However, it's also not particularly hard. Reflect over the y-axis means that you're going to take everything in that picture And you're going to flip it over so that it's on the top left of the coordinates instead of the top right. It's going to be in the second quadrant instead of the first. And what happens when I flip everything over to the left is the y's stay the same, but the x's end up being exactly the opposite of what they are. So since D right now is 12, 1, what's going to happen with it is the 1 stays the same, but the 12 is going to change to negative 12. And of the choices they have there, the right answer then has got to be negative 12, 1, and that ends up being F. And number 41, which of the following vertical lines cuts ABCD into two trapezoids with equal areas? And they give you some equations of vertical lines. X equals 2.5, x equals 3.5, x equals 4.5, x equals 5.5, and x equals 6.5. Now, in theory, you could find an actual answer, but it's really quicker and easier just to sort of eyeball things. The trapezoid runs at the bottom from 2 to 12 along the x-axis. And if I look at these different vertical lines, x equals 2.5 is clear over toward the left side of that trapezoid. That would give you a little part and a big part. They're definitely not equal. X equals 3.5 would be a little bit further over, but those are still pretty obviously not equal. So you could keep drawing lines further and further over and just seeing which one does appear to make things more equal. It's not too hard to figure out. The answer is going to be one of the last two. It's either 5.5 or 6.5. And honestly, when you're getting to this point on the test, what you might do is just pick one of them and call it a day. It turns out that 6.5 is actually a little bit closer, and that's because this goes out further on the right than it does on the left, and so you have a little bit more area in the part that's on the right than the left. So we do end up with E as the final answer. 42 is another problem about functions. It says given that f of x equals x minus 1 over x, and g of x equals 1 over x, what is f of g of a half? And our possibilities are negative 3, negative 3 halves, negative 2/3, 0, and 3 halves. So the key thing when you're doing a composite function, a function of a function, is that you always start on the inside and then go to the outside. So I start here by finding g of a half. I do 1 over a half. On the calculator, I did 1 divided by 0.5, and it told me the answer is 2. Once I've done that, I take that answer and I plug it in wherever there's an x in the function f. So I did 2 minus 1 over 2. On the calculator, I just did second, and the negative key puts the answer you just got on there. So I did answer minus 1 divided by answer. It told me 1.5. Now, I know 1.5 is 3 halves, but if you didn't know that, you might remember we said earlier you can always change a decimal to a fraction on a graphing calculator by hitting math and then enter, enter, and it gives you here that that is 3 halves, or K. All right, so our next problem. A formula is used to estimate the monthly payments, P dollars, on a short-term loan, and we have that formula is P equals 1/2 ARY plus A all over 12Y, where A is the dollars of the amount of the loan, R is the annual interest rate expressed as a decimal, and Y is the years of the length of the loan. It says when A is multiplied by 2, what is the effect on P? Either P is going to be divided by 6, P is divided by 2, P does not change, P is multiplied by 2, or P is multiplied by 4. So all I'm doing here is I just literally took the formula at the top and I changed the A to 2A, both of the places that it came up. Now, to make it a little bit clearer, I factored out a 2 from the stuff on the top, and I can tell that what's up with the formula I have there is it's just twice as much as what's on top. And that's why the answer is that we just multiplied by 2. Now we get to 44, the next to last one on this section of the test. It says the points E, which is 6, 4, and F, which is 4, 12, lie in the standard xy coordinate plane shown below. Point D lies on EF between E and F such that the length of EF is 4 times the length of DE. What are the coordinates of D? We have that it could be 7, 5, 8, 6, 8, 8, 10, 8, and 12, 10. So you'll notice that I already marked up this picture. I put 8s at the side. What that's doing is showing I had to go across 8 and I had to go up and down 8 to get from the first point to the last. I got those 8s by just subtracting the x's. 14 minus 6 is 8, and then I subtracted the y's. 12 minus 4 is 8. So now what I've got to do is find a point on the line where the distance to E is going to end up being a fourth as much as the distance to F. Basically, that means I've got to go over a fourth of the way and up a fourth of the way. Well, a fourth of 8 is 2. And if I take 6 plus 2, I end up getting 8. If I take 4 plus 2, I end up getting 6. And that's why our answer has to be 8, 6, which ends up being G. Number 45, we're looking at matrices, which is a topic that I often do around Christmas time in my advanced algebra classes. It says, given that A times the matrix 2, 6, 1, 4 equals x27, y, z for some real number A, what is x plus z? And we have choices of 4 thirds, 27 halves, 26, 27, and 48. So when you multiply a number times a matrix, it's called scalar multiplication, but nobody cares what it's called. That means it's just like distributing. You take the number out front times each of the numbers in the matrix. Here, the only number I know in the second matrix is 27, and I know I must have gotten that by taking A times 6. So I just look at top right, and that's where I'm getting 6A equals 27. Once I solve that, I can figure out that A is 27 6 or 9 halves. And then I'm going to use that 9 halves to multiply out and figure out what x and y are. I take 9 halves times 2 to get x. Turns out x is 9. And I take 9 halves times 4 to find z, and it turns out that z has to be 18. The question says, what is x plus z? So I just add together 9 plus 18, and it's got to be 27. Well, hopefully this was also helpful in preparing for the ACT. We got one more part to go, and we'll get to that in part 4.